Is it live now, brother? Is it live? Is it broadcasting live? Are we live, brother?
No.
Ikhwan, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Let us begin. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Brothers, we are beginning a series of lectures, starting with this one, I'm assuming it's this one, referring to the books of Hadith, the books of Sunnah. And it's important to be aware of this element of Al-Islam, the books of Sunnah, as we are all fully aware of the Quran. Not to say that we know enough, there's always more to learn, but we know a lot about the Quran, it's been preserved. We are all in agreement of its importance, its significance, and Al-Islam, and that it is a source of the Quran, of revelation. As Allah said in the Quran, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun." We have set down the dhikra, the reminder, and we will preserve it. So we know this already. However, what is commonly sometimes not known, there's jahl or tajahul, there's ignorance of it or feigned ignorance, where people wish to ignore the reality, as it relates to that which came down with the Quran, and that is the Sunnah. Now, in the ayah I just recited, there is also a reference indirectly to the preservation of the Sunnah. Because Allah said, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra." We have set down the dhikra, the reminder, and we will preserve it. So, when Allah said He will preserve the dhikra, it's not just referring to the physical words of the Quran, it also refers to that which makes it a dhikra. I.e., if the Quran was preserved, but we forgot what it meant, then the dhikra has not been preserved. That's what the ayah is trying to say. As in, for it to remain what it was called, the dhikra, it also has to have preserved with it everything that is necessary to maintain it to be dhikra. That's why the ulama even extend this ayah to include the Arabic language. Because without the Arabic language, you could not understand the Quran, and if you can't understand the Quran properly, then it is no longer a dhikra. So the preservation of the Sunnah is very important. Or not preservation, the acknowledgement and acceptance of the Sunnah as a Muslim is important. It is a condition for your Iman. A person can't be Muslim and reject the Sunnah. As Allah said in the Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So we have set down to you a dhikra, again. But so that لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ, so you can clarify to the people what has been sent down to them, so that hopefully by that, the Quran and your explanation, they will contemplate and they will think. So these are, you could say, the beginnings of this discussion about the 6 books of Sunnah. And hopefully I will try my best to give I'll say a slightly comprehensive, not too comprehensive. I'm going to try and skip through a lot of what I have. But just get through the basics leading up from the Quran preservation to Imam Bukhari. As in, I didn't just want to jump into, Imam Bukhari, he was since also, and this is his book, and then walk away. I wanted to also lay down the foundation for the Sunnah. So I've just given you 2 evidences, I'll just give 2 more and then we'll move on from that. As to the significance of the Sunnah, how the Sunnah is important, and how the Sunnah is something that was intended to be part of revelation. Listen carefully. When Allah revealed the Quran and gave us the Quran to recite in the Salah, and instructed the Muslims to memorize the Quran and recite it in our Salah, it was not intended that will be the only source of revelation. The circumstances, what was said, what events that happened, all of this form part of the revelation. And we need to understand this. You don't think of revelation as just being a book, the contents of that book, which is the Quran, and that's it. Everything, even the questions that came to the Messenger of Allah and how he answered them, what other Sahabas did in front of him, how he responded to that, all of this has now become part of what was conveyed. Become part of what was conveyed. And that's why it's important for us to acknowledge the source of Al-Islam. Because at the end of the day, as we know, Salafiyya is about, or Islam and Salafiyya are synonymous, they're the same thing, and it essentially is what they did, what the Sahaba did, what they understood, what was conveyed to them, how they received it, how they conveyed it to others. This is Al-Islam. And you find a common denominator for almost all innovators, people of deviance, of misguidance, who calls to the doors of hellfire, all seem to have one common thing and theme, and that is they seek to distance the Quran from the Sunnah, either by outright rejection, like with the Nation of Islam and the Qadianis and the Shia and the rest of them. They say, we don't accept this Sunnah you have. Ask yourself, why? What would be achieved by rejecting what the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said and did? What they achieve is the opportunity to inject their own interpretation of the Quran. That's what they achieve. That's the ultimate goal. Because as long as you have the Sunnah, you don't have much wiggle room. You can't really go left or right. You can't really go up or down. You're stuck in what was intended. And the other innovators who at least accept the Quran, the Sunnah in wording, they reject it in practice. Meaning, when a hadith is presented to them explaining the Quran, they reject the hadith. Through explaining it away, for interpretation, modern times, this, that, the other, things have changed, we've got to have a new insight to the Quran. I'm sure you guys have probably heard these statements before. We've got to rethink how the Quran is implemented in today's day. All that means is, I'm too shy to say outright, I want to reject the Sunnah. I'm too shy. I can't do that. Especially as my target audience are those who accept the Quran. So I can't just come out and say my bid'ah outright. I have to say it in a way which is palatable. I haven't rejected the Sunnah. I accept the Sunnah, but brother, you just need to explain and understand the nuance. That's the key word. I love the word. The key word here is the nuance. Brother, there's nuance. Basically, there's another interpretation which I'm going to give to you, which I'm going to supersede and replace the classical interpretation. That's essentially what is intended. But let's not get too bogged down with all that stuff. Let's leave the hype. But so let's look at this ayah in the Quran. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم. So classic ayah, we all know. All you who believe, obey Allah and obey His Messenger. So I'll repeat it twice. Obey Allah and obey His Messenger, and those of you in authority. And the ulama say this lack of repetition of ati'u, obey with ulil amri minkum, or the repetition of ati'u with the Messenger of Allah indicates that these two, Allah and His Messenger, are explicitly given this or given permission of ta'ah, obedience, blind obedience, acceptance of revelation. And others also obey if they have authority because they have authority. Allah's instructing us that in order to have a cohesive social unit, social cohesion, we need to have some kind of structure which is based on authority. Authority might not always be right or correct, but there is a hierarchy. But in terms of religious authority, dictating what is objectively correct, Allah and His Messenger says. And the other ayah, classic, clear ayah, مَا أَتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ مَا نَهَاكُمْ عَنْهُ فَانْتَهُوا. What Allah's Messenger gives you, then accept it. What He forbids you from, stay away from it. And that was revealed in reference to war booty, where if it gives you the war booty, take it. When he says stay away from the war booty, then stay away from it. I.e., his instructions, which were Shari'i instructions, they were legislative instructions of the Sharia, follow that and obey his commands in that regards. And I only added a little bit there because it seems obvious, but it's for the Qur'aniyuns or those who reject the Sunnah, they have their explanation. They say, oh, this is only referring to the war booty, nothing else. But then again, generally you find those kind of affairs of da'wah or affairs of understanding, or I guess misunderstanding, only occurs when one is unable to, or one is unaware of the Arabic language and usul al-fiqh. Because here it says, ma ataakum rasul, as in whatever, and that's this ma nakira, as in it's generic, whatever. It never said ma ataakum rasul min al-ghanima, what the Messenger of Allah gives you from the ghanima, and take it, and whatever he gives you, stay away from it. It's like when a child, you know, is told off, for example, and the parent says, you know, don't say anything to me, and you go, but I said anything. So then I say, oh, but you know, I heard what you said, don't say anything, but I'm sure you exclude from this my explanation. I can say the explanation. No, I mean anything. I said don't say anything, and I mean anything. Even your explanation, don't hear it. Those who have kids might understand. Those who have kids might understand this. Anyway, so I'm going to quickly fast forward. So there are many examples of the Sunnah, even. So that was some examples of the Quran, the examples of the Sunnah, which is kind of a circular argument. I give you that. For those who reject the Sunnah, they're like, how can you use the Sunnah as evidence for the Sunnah? I get that. And I guess the answer to that is, I've already given the answer from the Quran, so that should suffice. If you accept what was said in the Quran, then, as we're going to say here and demonstrate here, the Sunnah acts many times as an explanation, further expanding the Quran. And here we have an example of expanding on the Quran. عن مالك أنه بلغه. So Malik mentions that what came to him. أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال. The Messenger said, ما تركتم فيكم أمرين لن تضلوا ما تمسكتم بهما. I have left amongst you two things. As long as you stick to them, you won't be misguided. You won't fall astray. كتاب الله وسنة نبيه رواه مالك في موطأ. So the Book of Allah and Sunnah of His Messenger. And this next last hadith in Sunnah Abi Dawud, which is, I want to mention part of it because it's a very long one. But it mentions here, عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه قال ألا إني أوتيت الكتاب ومثله معه. It is not the case that I've been given the Quran and something like it with it. ومثل معه ألا يوشك رجل شبعان على أريكته. As in, it's almost coming to a time when a man will sit down on his arika, like his sofa or his resting chair, and mention his shab'an, as in his full stomach. One could speculate and contemplate what was the significance of being full stomached, but that was how he described full stomach on his arika, given a lazy kind of persona. يقول عليكم بهذا القرآن. And he says, and this person says, you know, take this Quran, follow this Quran. ما وجدتم فيه من حلال فأحلوه. Whatever you find in this Quran from halal, make it halal. وما وجدتم فيه من حرام فحرموه. And whatever you find in the Quran that's haram, make it haram. Sounds good so far, huh? ألا يحل لكم لحم and it says here, is it not being ألا لا يحل, is it not the case that it is not permissible for you لحم الحمار الأهلي? Now this is one of the only animal I know of that being domesticated changed the hukum of being halal. So donkey meat is halal as long as the donkey is not domesticated. Interesting. But yeah, so that the prohibition of donkey meat being domesticated is not in the Quran. وَلَا كُلُّ ذِي ذْنَابٍ مِّنَ السَّبْعِ, and also every animal that hunts with its fangs. You can't eat them. Also not in the Quran. وَلَا لُقَطَةُ مُعَاهِدٍ إِلَّا أَن يَسْتَغْنِيَ عَنْهَا صَاحِبُهَا. And the lost property of a mu'ahid, what's the word? Mu'ahid. Someone who comes into Muslim lands on contract, like visa, I guess it's trying to be translation today. So if he loses property, if he has lost property, it's preserved in Islam. You can't just take someone's lost property, you have to go through the due process. وَمَنْ نَزَلَ بِقَوْمٍ فَعَلَيْهِمْ أَنْ يَقْرَأُوا. Anyway, so he talks about further. So the point of the hadith, and I'll try to be quick with it, but it ended up being long, is that there are many things in the Quran, many things that are haram that are not in the Quran, and many things that are halal that are not in the Quran. And if you take the approach that you're only going to take that which is in the Quran as halal and haram, you're going to miss out all these ahkam we mentioned now about donkey meat being halal. Donkey meat being halal was the other one, trying to remember it. Can't remember it. Animals that hunt with their fangs and lost property of a mu'ahid. So there are plenty of things in the Sunnah that you won't be able to know without, anything in Islam, you won't know without the Sunnah. So I'm going to skip through the rest of the discussion, because I had a whole discussion about giving examples of how the Sunnah is necessary in explaining the Zahir. And the Mujmal. But again, we will skip over all of that for now, and we'll come back to. I'll try and briefly give a history of the Sunnah up to Imam Bukhari, and then we can go to Imam Bukhari. So, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam lived the life, and the Sahabas followed his life in everything, in all things, wrote it down, memorized it, conveyed it, and so on and so forth. Plenty of examples of Sahaba informing other Sahaba of what they heard. We have an example of Sahaba praying in one direction, and there's another Sahabi come in and say the Qibla has changed, and it changed the other direction. I get the fact that the Quran mentioned this change, but the point is, when they were in Salah, all they had come to them was essentially a hadith, information from someone else reliable that it happened, and then they acted upon it. So we have already the practice of conveying hadith between Sahabi, conveying information between Sahabi. But as you can imagine, being a Sahabi, at the time of the Messenger of Allah, with the Messenger of Allah being there, the source, obviously you'd want the higher chain. If someone said this happened, obviously you can always verify, you can always find out. Maybe there's more information that can be gained from the Messenger of Allah. So essentially the primary source of information that I'm trying to get at from the Sahaba at that time was the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And technically speaking, it was only ever gone to the Sahabi, as in the same knowledge from other Sahabi, when there was no other choice, as in to find out from the source might take long, might not be feasible at this moment, I might need to act right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all get that. There's no debate about it. We all get that someone might want to learn something or might convey something, and you just do so via reliable sources. And again, I'm not going to get to that whole discussion about riwayat al-thiqah, the narration or narrations of a reliable, trustworthy individual. We understand that is, we even function that way even in our lives now. So there's no need to make that a long discussion. And then when the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, then wahi was cut off. Revelation was finished. That was it. Whatever was known at the time and was taught to the Sahaba and Messenger of Allah or in the Quran, that was the last piece of revelation, and the only thing that it could do now thereon is preserve it. Preserve what they have by conveying it. And that's what the Sahabas did. They conveyed what they learnt to other Sahabi. And they convey what they learnt to their students who were not Sahabi, as in those who came to Islam after the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you can imagine, if you just think for a second, if you have to close your eyes, do it. But if you can think for a second, you are in Arabia 1,400 years ago. You've come to learn about Islam. You want to go to where this Prophet is, but before you get to see him, he has passed away. So obviously now you want to learn about this Islam and learn how to, learn this Quran and learn what you can, because knowledge is power. And the best place to go to will be those who are his companions. That's a given. That's everything. No one. I mean, if you want to know who Boris Johnson really is, I mean, you speak to those who work with him, those who interact with him, those who do business with him. You speak to them and tell us about him and whatnot. And that goes to everyone. You wouldn't go to me and you say, how is he? I mean, you might do, but it's not very reliable. I might tell you what's in the news. But that's second, third, fourth, fifth level information. I want mubashara, I want straight knowledge. And as we had, essentially the madrasas, the schools of knowledge from the Sahaba. Sometimes it was more formal, where they actually had lessons and they would actually teach. Sometimes it was casual, whereby events would happen and they would convey the information as it happened. But this essentially was the Sunnah and the Quran. The element of conveying in a more scholastic way, I guess, is less well known to most people. I mean, no one really sits down and discusses that so-and-so went to this lesson and he learned X, Y, and that's not very exciting. We like to hear about the stories of so-and-so battle happened, and in a battle he said this hadith and said, very the Messenger said that, events, there was fitna between Muawiyyah and Ali, there was this event happened, and there was assassination of Uthman. All these events happened, and we hear about how they conveyed information amongst themselves, and sometimes you can be deceived to think that this is how the hadith was conveyed, not realizing that the hadith was conveyed much like the Quran was conveyed. Madrasa. You had your teacher, and the teacher would teach you, and you'd memorize. You may even recite back to your teacher a few times. He will verify you've learnt it, and you'll learn other hadith. So if you look at the books of hadith and the actual chains of narration, you find 99.9% of the time it's more of a student-teacher relationship rather than a casual conversation that we're more akin to and hearing about. And that's something I'm making it very clear now, because when I first became Muslim, I had that vision that, we're sitting at a campfire one day and we're just talking, and then someone says, yeah, I heard this hadith, and he's like, oh wow, there's a hadith. And then it's like that, you hear a bit of information on the campfire having food, and then you get up and you go. And that's it, I heard a hadith. No doubt it definitely happened, like you would tell people, like I'm telling you, but also there were definitely more scholastic elements available, where they actually sat down and studied. Some students wrote, documented, dawwana. And those were the tabi'een. They were called the tabi'een. And the tabi'een, generically speaking, are those who met the companions of the Messenger of Allah, even if it's for a second, they met them. And generally speaking, the tabi'een you find in the chains of narration are students, scholars, ulama, and that's how they convey the knowledge. And again, part of the science of hadith is actually to identify that. If someone was just a casual narrator and we have no idea about his reliability, because he's just a casual person who heard it, that means something. Listen carefully. If there's a person in a chain of narration, and we know he's in a chain of narration, but we don't really know anything about his reliability because he wasn't a student like that, as in he didn't sit in the circles of knowledge like that, we just know that he was in the chain. That's a problem, because we have to know that he's reliable. And the only way you would know he's reliable is if he's a student and his peers would speak about him. You get the gist? So to become even thiqah, to become even reliable, you have to be in that space. You get the gist? I mean, it's same here. Imagine someone just came to this dars, you've never seen him before, he came and sat here, listened to the lesson, and then next week you see him on YouTube. Someone says to you, oh brother, is that brother reliable? Can I take knowledge from him? I said, I don't know, I saw him in the dars, but I don't know anything about him. No one knows. But brother, he was in a lesson. I mean, surely he must be reliable. He was in the dars with Sheikh so-and-so. Yeah, but I saw him there, but I had no knowledge about him. So, jealous about Sheikh, but that's all we know. And that's exactly how knowledge of hadith began to mature. Because those who were in the circles were spoken about. And that knowledge was conveyed person to person, level to level, generation to generation even. And those who were more casual come in, I say something and then move on and whatnot. We would record the hadith and memorize the hadith, but I also memorize that I don't know anything about him. So we can see that in the practice, in reality, the science of hadith, the foundations of the science of hadith was already in Islam. The principles were already there. But it began to be enacted and enforced in practice over the generations. Hence we had from the tabi'een to the tabi'een. Tabi' just means follower. So a tabi'un are just plural, those who follow. So the tabi'un are those who follow. So from the tabi'un that we might know of is Imam Malik, who wrote the famous Muwatta. Well, that's not part of our lesson today, but he did write the Muwatta. Those are from the earliest books of hadith that we have to this day. And Imam Malik was from there's a few chains of narration which are called the golden chain. Some might have heard the golden chain. Some of you are nodding your head. So if you nod in your head, what's the chain then? Nafi' and Malik and Nafi' and Ibn Umar. There you go. So that's the golden chain. That's one of them. There's another one from Salim. Obviously, it's subjective. Some might favor one, might favor the other, but Imam Malik was up there as from the major imams of hadith. And he has his Muwatta. And he had his Muwatta, and obviously he collected the hadith from his teacher, Nafi', who was a tabi'. And he collects his hadith from Ibn Umar, who was a sahabi. So we've already seen a pattern here. Nafi' is a tabi'i, Imam Malik was a tabi'i, and Imam Malik collected hadith in his book. So you can almost say that Muwatta Malik was essentially a book of a tabi'un. Yeah? And he wasn't the only one, there were plenty of other books like that. And the thing is, some of the books people collected for themselves, and some of the books people collected for public use, as in for teaching and whatnot. Like Imam Malik one. Imam Malik's book was collected for himself and obviously delivered to others. But some have had their own personal writings. They might have used it in the lesson, but it's more like reference. And some might have just used their hifz, memorization, as their reference and study. And there's a slight detour here on the issue of memorization and dependent memorization. Every one of you guys here has the potential to have an amazing memory. To come in here and memorize a hadith and leave with probably 5-10 hadith in one sitting. You all can do it. But it's a muscle that you guys haven't used. I was taught when I was in Madinah, memory is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. I didn't get that because the brain isn't a muscle. It's an organ, but it's not a muscle. But it does function in the same way. Because memorizing is a skill. There's actually even a discussion about photographic memory. You know, people, does a photographic memory actually exist? Is it a thing? Everyone, guys, is a photographic memory actually exist? Is it a thing?
I think so.
No. I mean, they've always, there are people who are really amazing memories. But the idea of seeing something once and memorizing it like that, what they've discovered through research and whatnot, and again, maybe this could change in the future, but what is so far as it stands today, what they've discovered is that people who have amazing memories, 99% of the time, or even more than that, it's because they've actually developed skills to remember things. Now, obviously, some people might be better at memory than others, but to have this super duper memory that you can see something and memorize all at once, that would actually be almost tragic. Imagine you can remember everything to the T forever. I mean, you can never forget those bad times, you know what I mean? So, what they've discovered is that it's actually very highly skill-based. And even those people do those acts where they tend to say something, they memorize everything, and they just learned how to memorize things very well. And it's very, very, very rare cases where people have actually had actual injury to their brain, and they've actually developed brain disorders where they can't forget things on that kind of. But that's not normal. Usually due to other things. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. So, in their day, I know it's hard to imagine, but things like paper wasn't commonplace. And even if they had paper, it wasn't thin like our pieces of paper, it was thick. That was probably, I mean, even this cover of this book here, it's a Madinah book, even this is cardboard, probably thicker than this. Like, has anyone been to Egypt, seen those papyrus papers? Like made from that leaf thing. Anyway, the bark of that thing, papyrus tree. Anyway, so it's very parchment, skins, it's very thick. Even a mushaf wouldn't have been this small, would have been huge. So writing wasn't something easily done. So memory was heavily used. But because we don't use our memory very often, we seem to doubt our own human abilities to remember things. And one example, that those of you old enough, how many of you are above 35 in here? No one? Am I the only one? Okay. Do you remember the days, brother? You used to have to remember telephone numbers. Yes. Do you guys even know telephone numbers? Do you guys know how to ring home without the phone? You just click on mum's name and say, Mum. But do you even know your mum's number? I don't. Not anymore, because we've offloaded that task to our phones. So in the past, they used to memorize things, and they never had YouTube to distract them all day long. They had knowledge, business, family life, what happened, and then revision, and then ibadah, and so on. So they were busy in that lifestyle, in that thing. So Imam Malik had his Muwatta, and he wrote it down. I guess documented if he passes away, if he dies, or the rest of it, and then others memorized it. Imam Shafi'i memorized Muwatta Imam Malik in 40 days. If you ever seen the Muwatta, it's thick, and he finished it in 40 days. We think, oh wow, 40 days, amazing. But that's what they did. You had to do that. There was no diary to write stuff down in. You had to memorize things. Just think of that world, the world where you couldn't record things anywhere other than your head, or very expensive paper and pen. Because obviously there weren't factories making paper and pen. It was a task, very laborsome and expensive, if at most. So you had to rely on your memory, and that happened. Anyway, so people wrote books. Even Imam Shafi'i had his own thing. On Musnad, we had ulama, lots of ulama wrote down the hadith that they had memorized, that they liked, that they thought was authentic or wasn't authentic, whatever they wanted to do. Some of them added notes to it, some of them added narrations to it, everyone's adding all sorts of stuff. Everyone had all sorts of stuff. Up until, you could say, I think Imam Shafi'i is where things started to begin. Where people started to take authorship more seriously, writing stuff down, and even commenting and authoring actual research and views and opinions down. Before it was more studying. I know he said, whatever we study, we know this stuff and become ulama, but it began to become serious, Imam Shafi'i, especially as he wrote down his Risala and his book on fiqh. So authorship became more and more serious, more dedicated, and more purposeful, I would like to say. And that became a thing. And then we have, fast forward to Imam Bukhari. Imam Al-Bukhari, which is the first book of the 6 books of Hadith. Before we go to Imam Bukhari, I wanted to just touch upon something before that, I used to scratch my head thinking, why is that? Imam Malik, he had his Muwatta, and obviously his teachers was like the Tabi'een. So why would the first book of Hadith be Bukhari and not the Muwatta Imam Malik? I always wondered that myself. I mean, I'm sure that should be somewhere in that thing, because if between Imam Bukhari and Malik is one or two teachers, then surely closer to the source is better. And the answer is very simple. And that's because most of the Muwatta Imam Malik is inside Bukhari. If you look at the Muwatta Imam Malik and look at the hadith in the chains, add two more people and you get Imam Bukhari in that same chain, same hadith. So why would you even mention Muwatta Imam Malik when it's already in Bukhari? And this is where we get to this issue of why we even have 6 books of hadith when in reality we have thousands. As in thousands of ulama who have their own books, their own little risala, even something small like a few pages, a few hadith. Why do we only choose 6? Who chooses these 6 and why do we choose 6? So before we get to Imam Bukhari, I just want to quickly, as an introduction for what's going to come next week, you're going to cover next week Muslim, Abu Dawood, Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, but why the 6? What made these 6 stand out from the others? And it comes down to simply one thing. I want to achieve a task. We know the Quran, where it begins and where it ends, but what does the Sunnah begin and where does it end? What's the first book of Hadith? What's the first chapter of Hadith? I know the first chapter of Quran is Fatiha, but what's the first chapter of Hadith? There is none. Those are books all over the place. So how do I encapsulate the Sunnah as a whole? Therefore, we have to choose books that encompass 99.999% of the Sunnah. So let's choose Imam Bukhari. I'm going to be obvious because this hadith, this Sahih. Straightforward. Let's start at the most authentic book that we've had after the Quran. And we'll touch upon that very briefly in a minute. And the features of Bukhari and what is it called and the rest of it. But why choose Bukhari? Because, get to the point, it's the most authentic Sunnah or book of Sunnah that we have. Great. If you made that as our basis, so we got all the Sahih hadith in one book. Great. What next? And why next? Okay, I choose Muslim. Why? Because a lot of the hadith that are in Bukhari are already in Muslim. Listen carefully. A lot of the hadith you find in Bukhari are already in Muslim. But there are some hadith inside Muslim that are not inside Bukhari. And they are called Zawaid. What are they called? Zawaid. From the word Zaida. Like it's an increase. So we start focusing on this new topic called the Zawaid. So imagine this. Imagine Bukhari has 10 hadith. And inside Muslim it has 8 hadith that is inside that 10. So we've already got 10. And we've got also 8 inside there, so whatever. But Muslim also has 2 extra hadith that are not inside Bukhari. So now we have 12. And now we look at Sunnah Nasa'i. And those of you who don't know, well, you're probably going to find out next week's time. Nasa'i also tried to have a Sahih as well, like Bukhari and Muslim. It's not known to be a Sahih, but he did try. And minus, I think, about 10 or 15 hadith which weren't Sahih, essentially achieved most of his goal. But again, a lot of the hadith that are inside Bukhari and Muslim are already in Nasa'i, but there are some Zawaid. So now we've got 10 from Bukhari, we've got 2 from Muslim, we've got 2 from Nasa'i, so that's 14 now. We've got 14 hadith, unique hadith. 14 unique hadith. Then Abu Dawood, again, 2 more, Zawaid. A lot of his hadith are already in the previous 3, but he has some additional books. And this is why they chose certain books over others, because they chose the books that had the most Zawaid, the most extra benefit. Makes sense? So imagine you had 10 hadith in Bukhari, 10 hadith in Muslim. But only 2 of these hadith in Muslim are in Bukhari. So 8 of them are new. We want that because we want more Zawaid. We want one book that encapsulates more additional letters, additional hadith. Again, Tirmidhi had a large chunk of hadith that weren't mentioned in the previous 4. Zawaid. And those 5 books of hadith were essentially covered most of the Sunnah that you possibly would need for fiqh and the rest of it. Then Ibn Majah came along. Not that he came along, but then we have Ibn Majah. And Ibn Majah has a lot of hadith that are not authentic, a lot. In comparison to the others. I'm not saying like most or loads, but compared to the other previous 5, it's quite a lot. But what Ibn Majah stood out with the others is that he had a lot of Zawaid. Plus, once you add Ibn Majah in, you hardly find any hadith in other books that's not mentioned. So once you've now got this, And if you want to add on, some people added on Bayhaqi, or some added on Mustadrak, but a few others. But once you get these first 6, essentially you've covered the Sunnah as a whole. So imagine you just stuck to those. It'd be rare, realistically, that you're going to need a hadith not inside those. I mean, I'm sure you probably think, yeah, I heard lots of scholars refer to other hadith from Tabarani and other books, but 99.9% of fiqh as a whole, wudu to qada and criminal law and trade, most of it is inside those. So that's the reason why we even have this whole dawrah, to study these 6, or to learn about these 6 books. And that's because of that. Because they were chosen as a mechanism, as a means to have a set number of books, almost like a curriculum, number of books that encompass the Sunnah as a whole. And yeah, that's it. Anyway, so we're going now to Imam Bukhari. And Imam Bukhari, go to the beginning of the notes. So Imam Bukhari, like I said, he was born at the time of Imam Malik, Imam Ahmed. So if you're trying to keep this in your head, so we've got Sahabi, then we've got Tabi'een, then we've got the Tabi'een like Imam Malik, and then you've got those like Imam Malik's time to like the Shafi'i and Ahmed's time, and then you've got those around that era, the golden era of Tadween, where everyone was recording everything. It became a thing. One guy started it off, it was a good idea, everyone's impressed. Another guy did a few, and everyone's impressed with that. And then now everyone's doing it. Now everyone's writing their books and writing their own thing and putting their own explanation and whatnot. It became a thing, the golden age of Tadween. And that was Imam Bukhari, whose name is Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ismail. Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn al-Mughira ibn al-Bardizbah al-Bukhari. And this is a cultural thing in Islam, or Arabs, or both, where we would identify someone by their nation. Now I remember when I was in Saudi, and this shocked me because obviously in UK culture that would be very rude, but in Arab culture, as we see from throughout history, it's been adi. Where we were reading, everyone's reading to students, and one teacher was calling one student, he didn't know his name, so he says, "Oh, African, read." He didn't say African, he said Afriqi. Ya Afriqi. Because he was calling, Ya Somali, read. Ya Pakistani, Iqra. I don't know your name, but I know you're Pakistani, just read. So Imam Bukhari is just from Bukhara. Imam Nisa'i is from Nasa. You know, Tirmidhi was from Tirmidh. Calling someone by their location where they were from was commonplace. And it wasn't a sign of racism, it was just, if anything, it was a sign of fakhr. It was a sign of almost like you're representing your peoples, your whatever, you know. And that is essentially how Arab or Muslim culture should be or is. You're not just a Muslim, you also represent your family, your clan, your people. And that should keep you in some ways in line. Maybe you want to be an idiot, but I'm going to embarrass my mum, innit? If you have no shame for your family, then you actually do find those people have no shame to embarrass their family. They'll do anything. Crime, loud, swear, whatever. But when their family's on the line and they respect their family, they can't do that. I've seen it myself when I was in Saudi teaching. One kid was being naughty. I reported to the headmaster. Headmaster brought him in the office. First thing he said is, "How can you behave this way? Your family holds the keys to the Kaaba," because they're from the Sha'bi tribe who hold the keys to the Kaaba. First thing he said, "Your family hold the keys to the Kaaba, this is how you behave?" And the kid just literally collapsed. He's like, "Oh," because he understands. I'm representing my family, and this is how I'm demonstrating to the people how the Sha'bi behave. That's not how the Sha'bi behave, but you get the gist. And this is what we need to bring back into our communities. The sense of shame. Shame for ourselves, shame for our family. And even if you don't want to be good because you're a good person, at least be good for the sake of your mum and your dad and your auntie and your uncle and that they actually raised you with something. You know what I mean? Anyway, so he was from Persian descent, and like most of these people, I'm not saying disrespectfully, I'm just saying most of the ulama of the past, they were Persian. And this is from the Hadith Message of Allah. He praised the people of Persia, saying if knowledge was in the star, you find them over there finding it. So he was Persian, origin, and obviously they were, like most people at the time, they were reverts. That's interesting if you think about it. If you think about it realistically, at that time, most of the Muslims were reverts. Or converts, whichever word you prefer. Some people don't even like the word revert anymore, but converts or whatever to Islam. Which means that everyone was on a level playing field. You didn't have this issue where people have this fakhr that I was born Muslim and I'm great as it is. No, everyone made a choice. And everyone sought hard to deliver, you could say, what's it called? The best they can. Again, very quick. He had a life similar to many. His father died very young. There's even a narration that he was born blind, and dua was made for him, and his sight was returned. It was mentioned as one of the miracles. Imam Al-Bukhari, many miracles have mentioned of people of the past. Take it as you wish, but that was what it was. And he sought knowledge at a very young age, and his memory was one of those things that was noticed from a very young age. His memory was noticed from a very young age. And again, everyone has their skills in different areas. This was his area. Some might be good with numbers, some might be good at art. And Imam Bukhari was good with remembering the hadith and narration. And I guess you could say focus, determination. I mean, I'll go for some narration. So he mentions here, for example, an Abi Bakr الكلوذاني قال ما رأيت مثل محمد بن إسماعيل. I haven't seen anyone like Muhammad ibn Ismail. كان يأخذ الكتاب, he used to take the book من العلم, any book of knowledge, فيطلع عليه اطلاع, and he used to just gaze and have a look at it. فيحفظ عامة أطراف الأحاديث من مرة واحدة, and he said most of the hadith just by looking at it once. Again, you might think, how is it even possible? It comes with skill. Anyone here who's memorized Quran would have noticed, or a portion of Quran would notice that the more you memorize, the easier it becomes to memorize, because essentially the words you're memorizing, you've memorized them before. Alladhina, you memorized that a million times before, so memorizing it again is not difficult. It's just about putting it in order. So if you start memorizing hadith, after the first 200, 300, 400 hadith with the isnad, you kind of got just who's in the chain of narration. You know who's the teacher of who. So the next hadith is just about the same, this hadith came from that chart, that page. You can make the picture easier. And when we say different hadith are memorized, it doesn't mean everything is unique. Maybe you might have one hadith through 5 different chains or 10 different chains. It means you've memorized 10 hadith. Listen carefully, everyone. The way the ulama of the past spoke, when they say they memorize X amount of hadith, they didn't mean in terms of the matan, the actual text was different. The chain was different. Maybe it's different by only one person. Maybe the chain was the same up until the last 2 guys, but one hadith went one direction to you, another one went to another direction to you. That's 2 separate hadith. So how difficult would it be for you to learn one extra person in the chain? Don't belittle it, brother. It is difficult. But it'd be easier than you imagine. But at the same time, it'd be difficult than you imagine, because now you have to make sense of all of this. You have to keep it all in line. You have to make sure you match the text with the hadith and all the rest of it. So there is work involved, but I'm just trying to give you a picture as to what kind of work is involved. So when you say, to memorize the hadith on looking at it once, I can see that. If you memorize a large number of hadith, it's very easy to memorize, especially when some hadith are small. Some hadith are few phrases. Man kadhaba alayhi muta'ammidan falyatabawa maq'adahu min an-nar. That's hadith. That's it. Man kadhaba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawa maq'adahu min an-nar. That's it. That's the hadith. Well, that's part of the hadith. The other part is the chain of narration. Yeah? So I can imagine doing 10 of those in a day, good memory, do it. Yeah? So that was Imam Bukhari was one of those guys that look at it once, I got it. Cool. Another one, Muhammad ibn Hamdawayh. Let's not go to سمعت البخاري يقول, and this now he heard Imam Bukhari himself said, أحفظ 100,000 hadith sahih. I have memorized 100,000 hadith that are authentic. 100,000 hadith that are authentic. Again, this doesn't mean individual unique hadith, but he has memorized 100,000 had paths, hadiths that are all authentic. وأحفظ 200,000 غير صحيح. And I memorized 200,000 that are not authentic. And this is actually where the real miza, I don't know that, it has in English. How's the best way to translate that in English? Or the best way to explain that in English? The real distinguishing thing about the scholars of the past is that they didn't just spend their time learning the good and think, oh, I don't have to worry about the bad. They even memorized imagine spending twice as long memorizing and revising regularly weak hadith. I see you think, what the heck? Why would you do that? But you do that because it's important. عرفت الشر لا للشر لكن لتوقيه. I learned the evil, not for the evil itself, but so I could protect myself from the evil. So, knowing things that are not authentic and recording it also allows later generation to see what was authentic, but also what was also lied about, also misunderstood, mistakes. You can learn about individuals. For example, someone had a good hadith. Throughout the whole 40 years of them narrating hadith, they narrated it one way. But 5 years before he died, he narrated it another way. That's important. Then you can make a hukum, تغير في الآخرة, as we say. He changed the last ends of his life. I wouldn't know that if those hadith were ignored. And everyone thought, okay, forget him, his memory's gone. You have to realize everything. And Imam Bukhari put probably more effort, as they did, to learn the weak and fabricated, as well as the authentic. I'll give you a couple more narrations. I'll give one here, and there's a long one. I'm going to paraphrase the thing. It says here, قال وراقة سمعته يقول. So someone said, I heard him say, ما نمت البارحة. I didn't sleep last night. حتى عددت كم أدخلت في تصانيفي من الحديث فإذا نحو 200,000 حديث. I didn't sleep last night. No, think about that one. I didn't sleep last night. Not the last couple of weeks or last couple of days, but last night. Until you could say, revised or counted up or looked over all the hadith that are inside my publications or whatnot, and it came up to about 200,000 hadith last night. So these were the people of those times. I mean, you get that today as well, but these were those people. Their life was the Sunnah and the Quran and Islam. They spent hours. And for the sisters out there who have husbands or relatives out there who are like this, who are dedicating a large portion of their time to something good, like hadith or even work, even an employment and whatnot, and not giving you as much time. Can you imagine Imam Bukhari's wife? I mean, come on, man, you've done 100,000. Come on, let's chat now. You've done 100,000 hadith. Allow the other 100,000. Obviously, they understood the great work that they were doing, and that was important to them, and they gave them their time. And it was great. This is how you both work together to get the Jannah. You encourage the others to do good, even at your own detriment. Even at your own detriment. That goes both ways, brothers as well. Imagine you got a wife who's doing Quran, doing adhkar, and you're like, when are you going to finish, man? I want to go Sahara Guru or something, You actually say, look, continue, man, do some more. Don't stop now. And the very famous narration, a story of Imam Bukhari when he went to a certain town, and they heard him coming, they heard about his memory, and they tested him. So what they tested him by doing was, they got 10 hadith, and they mixed up the chains with the text to see if they can catch him out. So they were all fabricated there and then, and they wanted to say it to him to see if he knew them. Just a test if he's not making it up. Maybe he's a fraudster or something, or whatever. And they recited all these hadith to him, and every one of them said, I'd never heard him before. Obviously, they just made it up. Of course, they never heard it before. And they were like, okay, I guess he's passed the test because he hasn't heard these fake hadith before. But then at the end, he said, but as for the first hadith you mentioned, with this chain, I've heard it with the other chain. And he restructured the whole 10 hadith that they gave. So they got these 10 hadith and mixed it up, and he actually repatched it back together again, based on what he had learned. But what was important, sometimes people overlook Imam Al-Bukhari, what he did, what he achieved there, is that what was amazing wasn't that he patched it back together again. It was that he remembered all of them by hearing it once. Listen carefully, they read it to him once, and he said, I didn't heard it before. That's all he heard. That was it, he memorized it. That first one. Next one, no, I heard it one before, but he had memorized it. And he got to the very end. I mean, if you try it with us, by the time you get to the third hadith, you forgot the first one. And we got to the fifth one, I forgot the third one. And every new one you learn, it deletes the previous one. It's like, it's like memory, if everyone does coding. It's like an array. As soon as you put something in it, you overwrite the... Yeah, so he memorized them all and rewrote. So that was an example of how amazing Imam Bukhari was. And there's many examples. I'm going to go through the narrations of Imam Bukhari. What the ulama have said about him. I mean, if what I've said already is not amazing, then I can't help you. So anyway, now going to his Sahih, and we'll come to draw a close here, because there's not much to say beyond explaining what it is and whatnot. We're not going to go into the actual chain and look at the chain and explain it. We can do it another time, another day, another life maybe. So Al-Jami' Al-Sahih Al-Musnad min Hadith Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa sunanihi wa ayyamihi. That's essentially the technical given name, as mentioned by Ibn Hazm al-Asqalani. There are other slight variations. Remember, even the title essentially is a narration, as in to him. And some people today have changed the narration from themselves up to Imam Bukhari. So it still exists. So yeah, so Jami' al-Sahih. Jami' as in it collects all of the Sahih. Al-Musnad, as in that which is Sahih, connected chain. Min Hadith Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as in Hadith, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So not narrations of companions, which also you could collect. But he wants only the Hadith, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa sunanihi wa ayyamihi, and things to do with his sunnah and his time that are authentic. That's essentially the title. Why did Imam Bukhari want to do this? I mean, there's various different narrations as to what motivated him. And to be honest, I think it'd be kind of odd to assume that it was only one reason why he had to do it, and that was the only reason. There's no reason why he can't have multiple different reasons that culminated into action. Like us. I want to do something. It's very rarely it's because of one event I have to do this one thing. Usually it's a collection of things that makes you, pushes you, motivates you in a certain direction. One of them was due to the many authorships that are out there, of many books that are out there that didn't distinguish between Hadith and Sahih, and he, wanted to have something that was just Sahih at the time. Also, it was a suggestion of I think it was teacher Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, saying it would be good if you had a hadith, a book on just hadith, Sahih hadith. And if you think about it, you probably wondering to yourself, why is there such a thing to actually mention it? Why didn't someone just do it? Because it requires research and it's subjective, some of it. I mean, it's your opinion. And as everyone knows, if you say this is hadith and Sahih, someone's going to say, no it's not. It's da'if, because something you didn't know about. Or you say it's da'if. No, actually it's Sahih, because something you didn't know about. To actually come up and make something Sahih, and it proven to be Sahih for everyone, that's a challenge. So he stepped up to the challenge, as others did, but Imam Bukhari was the most successful in terms of actually achieving his goal entirely. Whereby to this day, people say, yes, it's Sahih al-Bukhari, it deserves its name. Whereas Sunan al-Nasa'i, we call it Sunan. Although he also intended the Sahih as well. But because of the da'if that was in it, it didn't really achieve the same level of goal as Imam Bukhari. And then there's a famous dream, where he had the dream of Allah, where he was flies and he was brushing away the flies and interpreted that as being the hadith away from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even with that interpretation, we can see that narrating, ascribing fabricated and weak narrations to the Messenger of Allah is like flies. Would any one of us be happy with flies bothering the Messenger of Allah? You'd be like, what the heck? Get out of this place, dirty thing. You would hate to see the Messenger of Allah having flies around him, buzzing around. So what does that mean when you hear people, du'at, openly narrating the weak hadith, even admitting it's weak and saying I don't care? So clearly they are in one place and Imam Bukhari is somewhere else. We do care about hadith being sahih and da'if, and we don't want to narrate something to the Messenger of Allah, about the Messenger of Allah that is not true. So that's essentially in terms of the motivation of Imam Bukhari. Very quickly, how many hadith inside Imam Bukhari? And you'd be surprised to know there's ikhtilaf, and probably wondering why would it be ikhtilaf? I mean, if we have it, why would it be ikhtilaf as to how many the hadith there are? Because how do you count it? Because sometimes part of the hadith is mentioned in one place and another part is mentioned somewhere else. Either two separate hadith or one hadith. Sometimes one hadith is repeated twice. And I'll explain why in a minute. So, and maybe I counted it twice and I forgot it was already there mentioned. So that's why you get multiple different numbers. But I'm just going to brief you, just go through the basic gist of numbers. So number of hadith that are connected all the way to the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, including repetitions, including the takrar, 7,397. So including the fact that it's been repeated, 7,397. And when it says connected to the Messenger of Allah, the question begs, okay, there are hadith and are connected? Yes. And I explain why. So Imam Bukhari actually has hadith that are weak and not 100% authentic in his Sahih, but not in his Sahih. Does anyone know how?
Because he might have more than one narration.
Nope. No, because the way he authored his book, and let's go back to the issue of Jami' al-Sahih. A Jami' is a hadith book that encompasses hadith on different topics, a variety of topics. So Sunnah Abi Dawood is only books of hadith, only hadith on fiqh. Sunnah Abi Dawood, if you open it up, you only have books on fiqh. That was intent. His intent was books, hadith on fiqh only. Whereas Sahih Bukhari is a jami'. You have fiqh, you have aqidah, you have akhlaq, you have hadith, you have history, manners of history, you have all sorts. It's a jami'. And Imam Bukhari also wanted to educate with the hadith. So he put hadith in chapters. And sometimes in those chapters, he made the hadith be a chapter. And sometimes the hadith in the chapter wasn't authentic, or at the level of authenticity as his Sahih. But the chapter headings is not his Sahih. Listen carefully. It's a chapter heading. It's an unwan. It's laying out what's the understanding that you can take from the hadith in this chapter, and sometimes we make that hadith the chapter itself. So what the hadith says is essentially the chapter. It's like me making a chapter. This is the chapter of Innama A'malu bin-Niyyat. Verily actions are judged by intention. That's the chapter. So therefore, all the hadith in that chapter are going to be about intention. But I've made the hadith the chapter. So when the likes of Imam Al-Albani mentioned that there's non-authentic hadith in Bukhari, people start throwing stones at him. Say, oh, how can you dare you say that? He's not referring to the hadith. He's referring to the anawin. There's some things inside the unwan. There are other ulama of the past, he's already spoke about as well, and they had discussions. Anyway, get the point. Number of hadith that are mu'allaq, including repetition. Okay, let's get the mu'allaq. Mu'allaq follows up. Number of hadith that repetitions. I got loads of numbers here. Number of hadith that repetitions, 2,602. 2,602, which is amazing, considering that he's memorized over 100,000 hadith, and inside his Sahih, 2,602. Why so little in comparison? Because he wants an authentic book of hadith that is irrefutable. No niqash, no debate. Maybe other hadith which he thinks is also authentic, others may not. Maybe it is authentic by a collection of other narrations. Maybe it's many reasons why the hadith is in the end authentic, but he wants those that are independently authentic on their own. So we're reaching a high level of hadith. Yeah, there you go. So as for the chapters in Al-Bukhari, very quickly, and I'm trying to draw to a close here because on you guys it's over an hour and I've been chatting. I do chat a lot. I do apologize. So the chapter headings, there were two types. The ulama say those that are zahir and those that are khafi, those that are apparent and obvious, and those that are not so apparent and not so obvious. What it means by that is that what's the connection between the chapter heading and the hadith inside it? Sometimes the connection is obvious. Chapter of Innama a'malu binniyat. Therefore, all the hadith inside is about intention. It's obvious. Chapter says all acts are my intention, all the hadith inside is by intention. Obvious. That's zahir. And the way you achieve that sometimes is by actually putting the hadith itself in the chapter heading, or by putting part of the hadith in the chapter heading, or by giving a heading which is directly, essentially the fiqh. So the ulama have said the fiqh of Imam Bukhari. If you know what kind of madhab Imam Bukhari was, or the fiqh of Imam Bukhari, look at his chapter headings. Look at Sahih Bukhari and look at his chapter headings, and you'll be able to extract his understanding of the hadith from the unwan, from the chapter. And then those are khafi. Khafi meaning that the connection between the chapter heading and the hadith isn't so clear. You might need a bit of istinbath. It's a little bit of extrapolation, understanding to capture the details. And that's essentially how Imam Bukhari structured his Sahih. And there have been many books that try to sort to explain Imam Bukhari's book of his Sahih. The most prominent and more known of them is Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Very deep explanation. Any one of you guys knows Arabic or wants to benefit from it, then Abdul Karim al-Khudair has got an audio. He actually went on Saudi radio and explained through the explanation of it. And I used to listen to it driving to and from, just around Madinah. And whenever I had that lesson, it was a mind blow because it used to hurt my head sometimes. It was so deep. But yeah, there's the Fath al-Bari. It was such a huge achievement that I think it was the city he was in Egypt, because Ibn Hajar is Egyptian. He resided in Egypt. I'm not sure if he is actually Egyptian, but he resided in Egypt. It was a big celebration that he finished explaining the Sahih Imam Bukhari, and that it kind of makes me sad that we don't have that anymore. Can you imagine a time where an imam explains a book, authors an explanation of a book, and everyone's so happy of this knowledge that the whole city has a party? Whereas today, people don't even care about what you say. You know, you can author the best piece of work, no one's interested. Oh yeah, great. And they go on TikTok and start swiping. So those are good times. And I think what those times indicate, and I think we'll draw a close here, what those times indicate is a respect for the ulama and what they do. That's it. I mean, that will be literally it. The fact that Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, they had a party to celebrate his achievement, indicates the respect, the acknowledgement of what they are achieving, what they are doing in preserving the religion. And this was not just the people doing this, even up to the government level. It was, commissioned to have this party. So this shows that even from government down to the people, they respected and understood Islam. And they felt it was important. And we need to bring this back amongst ourselves, individually, and as much as we can with others. What I mean bring it back, as in bring back the love for the deen and the desire to embody and live in this deen. And I don't mean to put anyone down in specifically, so obviously I'm speaking generically, but I'm sure you come across many people who they love Islam, they say I want Islam, but when you actually give it to them, you see something else. And it's really sad. It's not entirely their fault. I mean, it is their fault, but it isn't their fault. We live in an environment which we can't deny the effects of our environment on us. Even something as simple as what we say and how we say it. Islam has guidelines. I can't just call people names and behave a certain way without any repercussions. Whereas when you mention to people certain things, they're like in shock. Wow, Islam gives you lashes for that? Even that reaction, they're like, wow, that seems a bit harsh. You can see in their mind, there's that su'uba, there's that difficulty to understand why is this, they find it challenging to accept the sunnah. They find it odd that someone else accepts it. Brother, would you do that? Would you do that with your daughter? Would you do it with your son? Would you do it yourself? I said, but why not? Islam says so, why not? Because again, we're so accustomed to not living in Islam that when Islam is presented to them, it seems foreign. And the only way to remove that, guys, ladies and gentlemen, is to learn about Islam, and not learn about Islam from top-down approach, meaning I want to use my head to understand Islam, and almost as if you're in judgment, but from a bottom-down approach where Islam is on top, and you want to see what is right and wrong. You want to adjust your head. You want to fix your mind and learn what needs to be right and wrong. Not you want to go in there and I know already right and wrong. I'm a good Muslim, and you're thinking everything. No, you need to go into studying Islam, like you guys are studying right now, on the basis that you don't know. On the basis that you are corrupt. We are all corrupt. And on the basis that Islam is going to fix that. If you're not going into studies in that mindset, you're not going to benefit from Islam. I guarantee you, you're not going to benefit from Al-Islam. Anyway, I had a few things here, but I don't know, take up too much of your time. Maybe another time we will have a follow-up. We can maybe go through some actual chains of narration and some benefits from the Sahih Bukhari and whatnot. Other than that, we'll finish out. Some kind of one or two questions, and then we will call it wali. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Any questions, anyone? تفضل.
Take you back. Alright, you mentioned the 6 books of Hadith. Who chose them?
To be honest, the ulama of the past, everyone has their own preferences, like you could say. But over time, people consolidate and coalesce. So it's not the case that one person chose it and everyone just followed. Everyone had different views on different things, but as review and cross-referencing and looking at different arguments, eventually people will coalesce to one thing. So at one point, Imam Malik was part of the 6 books of Hadith. But the reason why it was no longer included is because it was already in Bukhari. So it made no sense including Bukhari. Why would you include Muwatta of the 6 books of Hadith when it already exists in the remaining 5? It has no extra value. So it's like that. So one guy has a suggestion. It's like the issue of the golden chain. There's more than one golden chain. But brother, how can you say more than one golden chain? I mean, golden chains? No, but you can't have one. You can't have multiple hadith, multiple chains that are the most authentic chain. One could be the most authentic. For those that are not aware, the golden chain refers to the most authentic chain of narration. So are there more than one most authentic chain? You can't have the one most authentic. But everyone has different views. But over time, through research, cross-referencing, eventually people coalesce to that issue which is actually most authentic, which is most likely Nafi', Malik and Nafi' and Ibn Umar, and so on and so forth. So that's basically how it is. Same thing with hadith that are weak. At some point, some I thought was authentic. Someone objected. They said, why? It's because of this. Oh, okay. And it was accepted. It's just how this is how Islam is, and this is why it's decentralized. Islam is decentralized. There's no centralized authority which dictates this is how it is and this is the truth. No, everyone acts independently, and eventually they coalesce around the truth. Makes sense? Question? Is there any questions on YouTube? Is this YouTube? Are you on YouTube now?
Yeah.
Any questions on there? Or was this trolling?
No.
Okay, go on.
I have a question. Today we see some sects who are quite defiant in only accepting mutawatir hadith pertaining to certain matters and will reject ahad. Is there something that was ever present at the time of the Salaf?
So, good point. So the question was, that wasn't the end of the question. There are some people who reject certain type of hadith and they accept other types of hadith. Or they reject certain hadith in certain matters like aqidah, and they accept it in other matters like fiqh and whatnot. And the question the brother was saying is that, is this the case in the past, I think you're saying? Yeah. So, again, science of hadith wasn't like revealed in a book, you know, Kutub al-Hadith or Istilah al-Hadith. There was no mustalah at the time of Sahaba or even Tabi'een. Everyone had different attempts at finding the truth, reliability, using that which was taught to them from the Messenger of Allah and the Quran and the Sunnah and whatnot. And over time, they coalesced over certain things, and no doubt certain things still remain as discussion. Especially when, if you look at the science of hadith, certain hadith, certain things were difficult to learn then, which became easier to know later. So you, like Imam Malik, there's this thing about the Maliki madhab where they don't accept opinion, so they had the qawl of Ahl Madinah, the opinion of people of Medina, which is wrongly translated as what people of Medina do is evidence. That's not true. It's what the scholars of Medina do, not the people, but the ulama of Ahl Medina. So obviously, if people of Medina have an opinion, it's possible that someone in Kufa might know something they didn't. It's possible. Whereas 200, 300, 400 years later, it's now unlikely that that knowledge is not known, because knowledge spreads easily. At that time, it's very easy. Some Sahaba, Rasulullah passed away, he went on jihad somewhere else, he took knowledge with him and it spread out. And it's possible that one section didn't know and others didn't know, and you have these different issues. But, so as the science was being formed, you could say, the intricacies and the difficulties and whatnot was being ironed out, certain things were accepted and were later rejected and whatnot. From those, for examples like Mursal Hadith. Mursal Hadith, for those who are unaware, is basically where a tabi'i, someone who is a student of the Sahabi, will say the Messenger of Allah said. Why did they say that? What's wrong with it actually? As in, they said the Messenger of Allah said without mentioning who from the Sahaba told them. Now initially it wasn't an issue. And why would it be? Because all of our teachers are the Sahaba, and all the Sahaba are reliable. So it's not a big issue. It only became an issue when more and more of the Sahaba passed away. There were more and more tabi'een being born, and it was more and more likely that you actually heard the hadith from another tabi'i, not from the Sahaba. So at one particular time, Mursal hadith was ma'alash, is whatever. Because the likelihood of you hearing that narration from another tabi'i and not verifying from the Sahaba was less. As time passed on, it grew. Until Imam Shafi'i later on. Remember, let's look at the history. Tabi'een. From the tabi'een, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i was his student. So Imam Shafi'i was the first one to say, actually, I'm not going to accept Mursal hadith unless I know which Sahaba it came from, because maybe they heard it from another tabi'i who I don't accept from. So we can see now that that's a discussion that opened up. Should we accept it, should we not accept it? And that became a discussion, and over time, everyone kind of coalesced to what was the truth. What you mentioned here about the issue of mutawatir hadith in accepting, for those who aren't aware, a mutawatir hadith basically means a hadith that has so many different chains and so many different paths that it's impossible for them to all have agreed upon a lie. Like the Quran. The Quran is mutawatir. So many different paths, impossible to. Whereas a hadith ahad, which is often translated as being hadith from one chain, all it really means is that there aren't that many chains to reach that level. There might be 3 chains, 4 chains, 5 chains even. It's still ahad or mashhur, whatever, but still not reached the level of mutawatir, and that's still the issue. So the question is, this discussion of rejecting this non-mutawatir hadith in issues of aqidah, was that an issue then? As in, at that time, was it an issue? I mean, we can see why Imam Shafi'i, it wasn't an issue before Imam Shafi'i, because most of their teachers were tabi'een. But at what point did this issue of mutawatir, not mutawatir, come an issue? It came well later on. And it wasn't actually an issue for those beforehand. They never differentiate between aqidah and fiqh when it comes to mutawatir. And there's a reason why they did that. And it's the same reason I mentioned earlier on about people of deviation. They seek every avenue to distance themselves from the sunnah. And why did they do so in aqidah? Because they were mubtadi' in aqidah. That's the reason why. As in, it's unlikely we would have different sects, because you say Ameen aloud and he says it quietly. I mean, it's not a big deal. But if you say that you negate Allah's names and attributes and he accepts it, that's now a big deal. So if you say to me, how can you accept Allah's names and attributes and blah blah blah, it's tashbih, and you say, but the hadith, Allah's Messenger said in the hadith and the Sahaba what they say, but that's not mutawatir, and it's aqidah. So that's now becoming an excuse. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there are certain sects that bring that discussion, but if you look at the books of hadith, from the scholars of hadith of the past, you will find that wasn't an issue for them. And that's who we refer to. You don't go to a mechanic to ask about medicine. You go to a doctor. Is that answer your question? No. Any other questions?
There is one question here.
Yay! YouTube's got us a question. Is it super chat?
You mentioned photographic memory. Is it possible for us to achieve photographic memory in this age?
You can improve your memory very easily, and like with anything in life, you can learn on YouTube. But there are ways and methods that you can help increase your memory. But also on top of that, just actually memorizing improves you in memorizing. I mean, it's like any things. Memorizing is a skill. It's like what's his face? It's like gymnastics. No one's born a gymnast. No doubt, some people are born with better abilities and flexibilities, but they still have to go through the same hardship of learning and how to flip and jump and what kind of stuff, and they have to build muscle mass and that kind of stuff. They still have to go through the hard work. Same thing with memory. From memorizing over and over again, you start developing method. You start getting, you develop patience. You develop, you learn the language, the words. The things you're memorizing are no longer novel. They're now old. It's the same old stuff over and over again. Like that. So for example, if you start memorizing the hadith, words like سمعنا, حدثنا, أخبرنا, قيل لنا, قال, you heard it so often, it's like, I know, you get the gist. You might even start noticing patterns, even. For example, I noticed that most hadith that are narrated by Umar al-Khattab, he says qala. He never says, or he says, I heard the Messenger of Allah. He never says an Rasulullah. I'm not sure if it's a thing. I notice whenever I see hadith of Umar, he always says, I heard the Messenger of Allah say. I never hear him say, the Messenger of Allah said. That's something you remember. So when you come a new hadith of Umar, you know that, oh, it's obviously a qala, because Umar says, he always says qala. These things you pick up, which makes memorizing come easier and easier. Same thing in the Quran. Same thing in the Quran. But yeah, it's just about hard work. And anything in life, learning knowledge, getting a job, being married, all that stuff, it just requires hard work. And anyone who tells you can do things quickly, get rich quick scheme, buy this crap coin, altcoin, then you're a winner. Nah, that's not how it works, man. There's always hard work. So just stack those sats in it. Any other questions?
Can you recommend or advise on how we can get deep understanding of the books of hadith?
So that's an interesting question. How do you get deep understanding on the books of hadith? It's hard to answer that question because I would generally ask that person, what else have you studied? If a person became Muslim just the other day, like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and he says, brother, subhanAllah, Islam's such an amazing thing, I'm so glad I'm Muslim, oh great, mashallah, can you teach me fara'id? Can you teach me inheritance? I could, but is that really what you need to know right now? I mean, really? I mean, there's so many other things you need to learn. Hadith is very important, but I don't know what this person's level is in knowledge. Maybe what I might suggest to them if I knew them is maybe go for a book on Aqidah first, memorize some mutun in Aqidah. I think this is what we look lacking amongst the shabab, is this structure and learning. We become scholars in things that are secondary almost, and become jahil in things that are primary. And when we come up to shubha, we come to doubts from the kuffar about the Quran, about Allah, about His attributes, about Messenger of Allah, we're stuck. Because we haven't had that foundation. But we know about inheritance and that the daughter gets 2/3, I guess half if she's on her own, and they share 2/3 if there's two. But we get all that stuff, but we need to give, so yeah. But assuming that person has a good firm foundation, then now the primary part of studying hadith will be the language. If you don't know Arabic, then essentially you just regurgitating what someone else already knows. I don't want to make it sound too far-reaching or put anyone off, but if someone's really serious about studying the deen, they need to combine studying the foundations and fundamentals and aqeedah and whatnot with Arabic. With the Arabic language and memorizing the Quran, that's another thing we as especially Salafis need to focus a lot on, memorizing the Quran. Aqeedah, strong. Arabic, strong. Quran, memorization, strong. If this is your asl, everything else is simple. Once you've got those stuff, that's simple. There's even one of the Salaf. His son said to his dad, who was a hadith muhaddith, he said, I want to learn hadith. Dad, I want to learn hadith. Ya Abi, hadith. And he said to him, memorize Quran first. So he went and memorized Quran. Came back, Abi, hadith. And what did he say to him? Go and lead Taraweeh first. Lead Taraweeh. And when I first heard it, I thought to myself, why Taraweeh? Because that's your daleel that you memorize the Quran. You haven't memorized the Quran until you can stand in front of the people and read the whole Quran. You haven't memorized it. You attempted. And I remember my teacher in the Jami mentioned that Hifth, what's the Arabic he said? The Arabic says, Al-Hifdhu huwa an ya'tiya bil mahfudhi inda al-haja. Memorization is to bring that which you've memorized when you need it. Not just you memorized it. If you need to know how to make wudu, and you can recite the ayah of wudu, and if you need to make a hajj, you recite the ayah to relate to the hajj, and if you need to do it to the jar, if what you need to act on is in the Quran, and you can recite it when you need it to do it, then you can memorize it. Not that you can recite from here and here and teach and you go home and done. No, you have to memorize it that way. And how do you prove that? Stand in front of people, your aunties, your uncles, your neighbors, your friend, the guy down the road, the bully at school. They're all behind you listening to you, someone giggling, someone chatting, someone making noise, and you recite the whole Quran, no mistakes, then come back to me to learn hadith. Because you've demonstrated dedication, that you're not just taking it as a wishy-washy, jokey thing, you're serious. So that's what I would suggest. And if the person is like that, and they're serious about studying knowledge, and you know Arabic, then there are plenty of books out there that will go through this. One of them being Tadween al-Sunnah, which is a lot of what I've taken, this comes from that, which we cover in the Jam. And lots of books on Mustalah to study and whatnot. There's lots of things that are available. And as I mentioned just a second ago, actually, I was looking around, there's a hadith I had here. I had some examples of Imam Al-Bukhari. This is from the Book of Revelation, Kitab al-Wahi. And it mentions, حدثنا الحميد عبد الله بن الزبير قال حدثنا سفيان قال حدثنا يحيى بن سعيد الأنصاري قال أخبرني محمد بن إبراهيم التميمي أنه سمع علقمة بن الوقاص الليثي يقول سمعت عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه على المنبر قال سمعت رسول الله. ما said about Umar, almost always says I heard the Messenger of Allah. That's just something Umar, I noticed about Umar. This is one hadith here. It says I heard سمعت عمر بن الخطاب, I heard Umar al-Khattab على المنبر, on the minbar, say I heard the Messenger of Allah say. So, like I said, when you actually get into studying hadith, I mean, it's a bit daunting initially, going through narration. Who's the Sufyan al-Thawri? Who's Sufyan al-Uyayna? Who's Abdul Mubarak? Who's these guys? I don't know who these guys are. But after a while, oh, I know this guy. I know that guy. I know his students. I know his teachers, and it becomes easy. Should you spend your time doing that though? That's not a discussion. It's great. It's a fard kifaya. It's not necessarily ayn, but it's definitely great to know. Any other questions?
Last question, inshallah. How many hours would you recommend that we give time to memorizing and learning hadith?
Yeah, so I guess I'll attach that to the previous question. How much time do you give to memorize hadith? Yeah, again, I would give a lot of time to memorizing Quran first. And maybe things like, 40 hadith Imam Al-Nawawi, Umdatul Ahkam. That's a perfect book to memorize. It's easy to memorize. You can finish it in a year. All it is all the hadith of fiqh in Bukhari and Muslim. So al-muttafaqun alayh, they agreed upon. It's only about 200 and odd, I think 200 and odd or 400 and odd. It's not a lot, it's just a tiny book you can memorize. And that will essentially give you all the hadith that you don't have to worry about, because it's agreed upon. Both Bukhari and Muslim said they're authentic. You just memorize it. You always focus on memorize the hadith, memorize the chapter, what it's referring to, maybe you get some basic knowledge from it, and it's great. And I don't mean by any stretch of the of the word to sound like I'm discouraging anyone from going deep into the hadith sciences. All I'm saying is that for someone who's living in the West, maybe what is more important is to study it as something you apply, as well as studying it as something you just know. Because sometimes shaitan can trap you that way as well, whereby you get distracted by just learning and not focus on the doing. As in, I'll probably easily find someone who's memorized 40 hadith Imam Al-Nawawi. But how many of them can actually explain it in a dars? It's great, you memorize the 40 hadith, that's amazing. Now sit down and give us 10 fawaid from each hadith you memorized. Without making it up, as in you've learned it, you've studied it, and you know these hadith. And you can explain how these 10 fawaid come from the hadith. These are the things we just... Same thing in the Quran, by the way. How many of us have memorized ayat of the Quran and have no idea how to extract... I got no fiqh from it. I got no benefit from it. That's one of the things that we did in our madrasa. Remember, for example, when we had the chapter or the topic of wudu, we made the kids memorize the ayah of wudu. And when they memorized the ayah of wudu, we made them memorize the actions of wudu along with the words. So they mentally join in. فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ. They do the actions so they can attach to the ayah with the action. So it's real. And these are the things we need to start doing as much as we can. So all I'm saying is that in the West, I'm trying to focus, I want like the Shabab to focus on getting from their studies that which benefits them mubashara, benefits them directly, immediately, as opposed to trying to achieve some scholarly level and forgetting that they actually have to develop their deen. Because it's unfortunate there are actually plenty of people who are memorizing hadith, but their manners is disgusting, their akhlaq is terrible, and there's so many things that are failing about them that you wonder, but bruv, I know a guy who doesn't speak Arabic, he's Tajweed is mash, but he's 10 times better than you in terms of deen. Why is your knowledge not seeping into the qalb? Why is it not going in? So yeah. That's it, inshallah. Sallallahu alayhi wa Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We've got like less than 10 minutes until Maghrib. So we get to pray and then go home. That's it. We're cool, man. Thanks for having me. And may Allah protect you all, help you benefit from these courses, make dua for the organizers of the course who dedicate their time and effort with no pay to bring to you the deen and bring to you Islam. And don't forget to stack those stats. Assalamu alaikum.